10,000 hours of practice is said to make things perfect. Well, we all know that nothing is perfect, but I will tell you 10,000 hours of practicing something does make you prepared. So we'll talk about retirement preparedness and readiness as we get started on the show. Welcome back to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Grant Soliven.
And I'm Jamie Burton.
Jamie, it is so glad. Good to have you here.
I'm so
grateful.
glad to be here.
Now, you are looking brown and beautiful. You just got back from Florida, yes?
I did, yes. Went to Fort Myers with the family for a week, and it was wonderful soaking up that vitamin D.
I am so angry you didn't invite me. I offered to be a free bodyguard.
I know.
Didn't take me up on my offer, but no, regardless, glad you and the family are back and safe. The show this morning, going over... turning your savings in retirement savings from savings into paychecks, and specifically for the show and segment, we want to talk about how to begin your retirement practice year. Because I think everyone wants to jump into the tactics, Jamie, right? Everyone wants to kind of get in there and say, okay, how do we do this? How do we do this? And it's just like, me being a young athlete. I know you were a young athlete as well. We always want to go out there and do what's best and make the big hit, make the big play. And we forget that it takes time. You got to put practice in, right? Those dreaded line sprints, weightlifting, time watching video,
absolutely,
all that stuff.
Yep.
Or if you weren't athletically inclined and you were more gifted in things like music and art, how many resources and how much time you had to put into just perfecting that craft. And so the same thing is true in all elements of life, right? You got to put hours in, Jamie.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about a retirement practice year from a 30,000-foot view perspective, help us understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, so when we're looking at the retirement practice year, what we know is that people have worked for years and years and years to save all of the assets that they have saved up. And now they're getting to the point where they're like, okay, I'm ready to retire. Now what? It's so unnatural for them to sit back and have the idea that they're no longer going to be having this income coming in bi-weekly or twice a month, however they were getting paid. And now it's like, okay, well, how do I look at the assets that I have saved and turn that into an income to where I can live off of? So what they have to really take a step back and look at is, well, what does it really take me to live? Like, what does it take me each month to pay for my bills, to go out to eat, to go do the entertaining things that I want to do? If I want to go on vacations, what's that going to cost? And that's really a turning point for people, because a lot of times they don't know what it costs to live each month. They've just kind of gone through the motions of paying their bills and doing what they want to do because they have that income coming in. They know that they have those working hours in to where they're getting paid for it.
Right.
So now they have to do kind of a mindset shift and be like, okay, I need to do a practice year where I really keep track of what I'm spending. I keep track of what my bills are costing me. I keep track of how much it's costing us to go out to eat, to go to the movies, to take the grandkids out. Like they have to really keep track of what they're spending each month so that they know once they do get to retirement and they have to flip that switch of now taking money out of their investments, how much it's going to cost them to live month to month, so we can really get a plan put together of the best way to do that.
100%. Now, here's what I'll say, and Jamie very well said, by the way, thank you. For many of us, living on a budget isn't natural. To Jamie's point that she put really beautifully is we're used to living within our means based on the dollars that come in paycheck to paycheck. And some people call that budgeting. But what happens is more often than not, is that we actually increase our spending as our income increases. And so very rarely do people sit down and say, okay, how am I going to pay my future self? Do I have this available? Now, many of us that do pay attention to that will use certain financial software. There's things like mint.com, and there's all kinds of things you can run through QuickBooks if you're familiar with that. Some people keep it on Excel spreadsheets. So there's different tactics you can use. And so one thing we want to really illustrate is when you get into the years where you're approaching your life after work, and remember, folks, we don't call it retirement because people don't quit their career to watch grass grow. Now, if you're the individual that wants that, I'm sorry, please do that. Right? But when it comes down to other families that we take care of, they've got plans, they've got goals. And so when looking at that, the prep time or running the retirement practice year, Jamie, what are the two key elements of that budget we're looking for and why?
So the two main things that we're looking for is you have fixed expenses and you have social expenses. The fixed expenses are the expenses that are just not going to go away. They are a cell phone bill, your electricity, your cable bill, things that are going to continue year after year after year because that's what you have to live off of. Then you have your social expenses. That's more of the going out to eat, going on vacation, going to the movies, taking your grandkids to go do fun things. And we are so focused on this because we know that when people first retire, that those social expenses are much, much higher than what they would be later in life. So a lot of times when we sit down and have these conversations with people, it's jarring to them because they're like, wait, it takes me this much money to live off of each year. I have to take this much money out of my investments to replace my standard of living. My investments are never going to keep up with this. Like, there's no way that I'm going to be able to live the life I want to live with what I have saved up. And so that's a conversation that we have to have because we're okay with people spending more when they're first retiring. We know that when people are first retiring, that those social expenses are going to be much higher than what they are 10 years into retirement.
Correct.
Because that's when this is when they have their free time. This is when they're young enough to be able to go and do the things that they want to do. They don't have as much holding them back. They're going to spend more. And what we know is that those fixed expenses, they are going to inflate over time with inflation, but the social expenses, they kind of tend to level off. They don't inflate like the fixed expenses do. So that's why we like to divide them up into two different expenses and be able to plan for it that way.
100%. Again, well said. And I think what we also want to illustrate is, well, actually, here's what I want to illustrate. In one of our other shows, Aaron and I talked about one of our biggest pet peeves in the industry. And I will say, being Jamie, you and I were both actually at Purdue University, boiler up, hammer down, studying certified financial planning at Purdue University. And I think we had so many professors talk to us about replacing income. The certified financial plan board exam actually discusses replacement of income in their education curriculum. And it's one of the things that I hate about financial planning software and other tactics that advisors use. Because they come to you and they say, okay, well, here's how much money you've made, and we have to replace X percent of that, depending on what region you live in. Hey, that's hogwash. You got to replace 100% of your standard of living, right? 100%. And this goes back to, Jamie, your reaction, or individuals' reactions to the jarring fact that, oh my gosh, am I going to live off of that? It's because when people do that, when they illustrate that in the software, let's say, for example, you make $100,000 a year, and gross, and the systems, and based on those systems, they're like, oh yeah, you need to make $70,000 a year gross, which translates based on tax brackets, assume 12% married, filing jointly, right? All that translates to at least $5,000 a month. And it was a little more than that, but you get the math I'm trying to do. But here's the thing: let's say you're really studious and you're a great steward of your wealth, like my wife, and she only needs $3,000 a month. Well, now she's overspending unnecessarily and putting a lot of extra stress on things that don't need to be there. So make sure when you're evaluating your situation, listen to what Jamie said, right? Make sure you understand these elements. And before you get to that finish line of ending your career, whether, and this is, again, for most people, this is, you're doing this on your own. For those individuals that are entering a trigger transition, unfortunately, because you were forced out of employment, well, this is going to change some elements of the conversation for you, but we're more than happy to engage in that. But for those that are on track and reaching the goal of ending their career on their terms, right, make sure you practice this. You put together, using software that's available to you, what your fixed and social expenses are. Can it be maintained? Can you live off a month number that you want to live off of? Or, you find out, oh my gosh, I've been living off of way too much or way too little. Maybe I should save more, spend more. Because here's the reality, folks. Most people don't get to retirement and switch from drinking beautiful bottles of wine to boxed wine. It doesn't happen, right? So make sure you're prepared ahead of time, because we don't want you caught off guard when you get there and you haven't prepared. So one of our other shows we talked about 7 things you can litmus test your plan against to know if you're not prepared. This is one of them. Make sure you practice and you know what you're getting into. And Jamie, let's spend the last couple minutes here talking about, when you're looking at those paychecks, some of the biggest ones we know that are coming in are Social Security. If you have a pension, right, so that's a wonderful thing, by the way, and consider yourself very blessed. and people are like, wait a second, why should I consider my blessed? I worked really hard for that money. You did, and you're right. But most retirement plans do not include distribution plans anymore. And so when looking at that and evaluating those, I want people to understand and know this. Just because you have Social Security and a pension, that doesn't mean you're going to take it as early as possible, right? When you figure out your budget, that doesn't mean let's push our fixed income into that bucket and force it to work in those numbers. Because Jamie, they're forgetting one massive thing. What is it?
It's taxes.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's another one of the biggest myths that we know about for retirement is that when people are in their working years, they are told pretty much all the time that once they get to retirement, they're going to be in a lower tax bracket.
Yes.
So save all your money tax deferred. Take that Social Security because you've worked so hard to pay into Social Security. Take it as soon as you can. It's tax planning is a whole new baby of itself that is so complicated. It's so misunderstood that it needs a whole conversation around how you're going to live when you're in retirement.
100%. And we're going to talk about that eventually one day. And,
Yes.
and we've actually covered it in some of our older segments. But wrapping up this show and segment, if you have questions and want to dive into this retirement practice here, please reach out to us, 800-928-4001, or you can reach out to the website, yourlifeafterwork.com. Brittany will be on the other line helping you get set up. And we appreciate you being here, and we'll see you soon.